Detroit walked out of the 2025 season with something very few teams in this league can honestly say they have: a wide receiver room that, on paper and on film, can change games every single week. When you break it down calmly and look strictly at what happened on the field, this was the only team in the NFL to place two receivers inside the top 10 in receiving yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown finished fifth in the league with 1,401 yards, while Jameson Williams finished tied for ninth with 1,117. That alone already tells you the scale of what this passing attack became, but the deeper you go, the more impressive the picture really is for Detroit fans. St. Brown didn't just put up numbers. He continued to build a historic start to his career in Detroit. 117 receptions, 11 touchdowns, and his third straight All-Pro selection, along with his fourth Pro Bowl nod. In franchise history, through the first 5 seasons of any player's career, no one has been more productive. He sits first in receptions with 547, first in receiving yards with 6,252, first in 100-yard games with 24, and second in receiving touchdowns with 44. Those aren't just good stats. That's the resume of a player who has already cemented himself as one of the pillars of this era of Lions football. Across from him, Jameson Williams finally delivered the kind of season that matched the vision Detroit had when they drafted him. 65 receptions, 1,117 yards, and 7 touchdowns, tying a career high while finishing third in the entire NFL in average yards per catch at 17.2. The explosiveness was real, the game-breaking speed was real, and defenses had to respect it every snap. When Williams was rolling, it opened everything underneath and stretched the field in a way this offense hadn't consistently had before. But the story of this receiver room doesn't stop with the 2 stars. One of the most important developments of the season was the emergence of rookie third-round pick Isaac TeSlaa. Early on, his role was limited, but as the year went on, he grew into a reliable and trusted option, finishing the season with 6 touchdowns. By the end of the year, it was clear the coaching staff was putting more on his plate every single week. Dan Campbell himself made it clear that among the young players on the roster, TeSlaa showed the most growth. He was asked to handle multiple roles, line up in different spots, and respond when the rookie wall hit. Instead of fading, he pushed through it and kept producing, which says a lot about what Detroit believes he can become heading into his second season. When you put those 3 together, St. Brown, Williams, and TeSlaa, it's not hard to see why there's real optimism about the future of this passing game. Detroit finished third in the NFL in passing yards per game at 253.1, third in touchdown receptions with 36, and third in completions of 20 or more yards with 66. On top of that, they led the entire league with 2,479 yards after the catch. That doesn't happen by accident. That's a reflection of route running, timing, physicality, and the ability to create once the ball is in your hands. Still, not everything was perfect. And this is where the conversation gets more complicated. After leading the NFL in fewest drops in 2024 with just 7, and posting a league-best drop percentage of 1.7, the Lions saw that number jump significantly in 2025. 26 drops became a real issue at times. Jameson Williams was credited with an NFL-high 12 drops, while Amon-Ra St. Brown had 10, which was a career high for him and tied for the second most in the league. Those are moments that stalled drives and, in tighter games, absolutely mattered. It doesn't erase what these players bring, but it does underline an area that has to be addressed moving forward. Beyond the top 3, there are important decisions looming. Khalif Raymond is set to be an unrestricted free agent, and his value to this roster goes far beyond the stat sheet. Since Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell arrived, Raymond has been a glue guy, someone who can line up at all 3 receiver spots and contribute on special teams. This season, he caught 24 passes for 289 yards and a touchdown, averaged 7.5 yards per punt return, scored a return touchdown, and broke Mel Gray's franchise record for punt return yards. He's also widely respected in the receiver room, especially by younger players.
Tom Kennedy, a restricted free agent, continues to be the definition of dependable depth. He's bounced between the practice squad and active roster for 5 seasons, but when his number was called, he delivered. On Thanksgiving, when St. Brown went down in the first quarter, Kennedy stepped in and caught 4 passes for 36 yards. When Raymond was injured, Kennedy also handled return duties, averaging 16.7 yards per punt return and 27.9 yards per kickoff return. His reliability late in the season was such that Detroit kept him active while making rookie Dominic Lovett a healthy scratch down the stretch. All of this sets the stage for a fascinating offseason discussion about how this receiver room should evolve, what needs to be fixed, and how much more dangerous it can become if the details are cleaned up. Looking strictly at what we saw on the field, do you believe this wide receiver group is already good enough to carry Detroit even further in 2026? Or are the drop issues and upcoming free agent decisions bigger concerns than they appear right now? What makes this conversation even more interesting is how stable this wide receiver room actually is when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Detroit is not entering this offseason needing to reinvent anything here. The core is already in place, and it's a core that has proven it can produce at an elite level across an entire season. That matters, because continuity has been one of the defining traits of this Lions rebuild, and the receiver group reflects that philosophy as clearly as any position on the roster. Amon-Ra St. Brown is not just the top target, he's the tone setter. Everything about how he plays bleeds into the identity of this offense. The physicality after the catch, the reliability on third down, the way he consistently wins in tight spaces, that's the baseline standard for the entire room. When you have a player who has already put himself at the top of nearly every receiving category in franchise history through 5 seasons, the rest of the group naturally falls in line behind that level of professionalism and production. Jameson Williams complements that in a completely different way. His presence alone forces defensive coordinators to alter coverage structures, and even in games where the stat line didn't explode, his speed dictated spacing. The fact that he finished with over 1,100 yards while still leaving obvious room for improvement speaks volumes. The drops are real and they can't be ignored, but they also don't erase the growth. They highlight the next step. If Williams cleans up that part of his game, the ceiling of this passing attack jumps again without adding a single new name. Then there's Isaac Tesla, who might quietly be the key to how this group evolves. 6 touchdowns as a rookie, increasing responsibility as the season progressed, and clear trust from the coaching staff are not small details. Detroit didn't need him to be a star right away. They needed him to be dependable, smart, and tough, and that's exactly what he showed. His ability to handle multiple roles gives this offense flexibility, and if his upward trajectory continues, the Lions could be looking at a trio that's not just productive, but extremely difficult to match up against week after week. Depth has also been one of the underrated strengths here. Khalif Raymond's potential free agency isn't just about losing a receiver, it's about losing versatility and leadership. His ability to contribute on offense, return punts, and mentor younger players is part of why this room functions the way it does. Tom Kennedy's steady presence reinforces the same idea. He's not flashy, but when injuries hit, he executed his assignments and kept the offense on schedule. That kind of reliability doesn't always show up in season summaries, but coaches and teammates never overlook it. From a roster-building standpoint, it's also clear that Brad Holmes values this position. With the exception of one draft, he has consistently added receivers at different points, not because the room was weak, but because he believes in keeping it competitive and stocked. That approach has paid off. Even with more pressing needs elsewhere, Detroit has built a receiver group that can withstand injuries, adapt to game plans, and still produce at a top 3 level league-wide in multiple passing categories. So as this offseason unfolds, the question isn't whether the Lions have weapons. They do. The real focus is refinement. Reducing drops, maintaining chemistry, and deciding how to handle key role players will define whether this unit simply remains very good or takes the next step toward being truly dominant. Everything needed for that jump is already inside the building. There's also an important emotional layer to this receiver room that numbers alone don't fully capture, and it's something Detroit fans feel every Sunday. This group plays with an edge that mirrors the personality of this team. Amon-Ra St. Brown embodies that mentality better than anyone. He blocks, he fights for extra yards, he demands accountability, and that standard raises everyone around him. When mistakes happen, like the spike in drops this season, they don't feel like signs of complacency. They feel like pressure points that this group is already motivated to correct. Jameson Williams fits into that same competitive ecosystem in a different way. His growth wasn't linear, and it wasn't always clean, but it was real. Detroit didn't ask him to be a possession receiver or something he's not. They leaned into what makes him special: vertical speed, suddenness, and the ability to flip field position in one snap. When you pair that with the volume he handled this season, it becomes easier to understand why the staff continues to invest in his development rather than questioning his role. The mistakes are visible, but so is the trust. Isaac Tesla's rise also says a lot about how this coaching staff evaluates receivers beyond just raw talent. His intelligence, toughness, and resilience were repeatedly highlighted because those traits allow the offense to stay functional when game plans change or injuries hit. He wasn't just running routes, he was executing concepts correctly, lining up in different spots, and finishing plays. That's why his 6 touchdowns carry more weight than the raw total suggests. They came as a result of trust, not schemed shortcuts. The chemistry between these players is another subtle but crucial factor. Detroit's league-leading yards after the catch didn't happen because of broken tackles alone. It happened because receivers were in the right place, at the right time, with momentum. That's timing, spacing, and understanding coverage. It's the product of reps, communication, and continuity. That's why this offseason matters so much. Keeping that chemistry intact while sharpening execution is the balance the Lions are trying to strike. Even the conversation around free agents like Khalif Raymond and Tom Kennedy fits into that larger theme. These aren't just depth names. They represent stability. Raymond's ability to contribute on offense and special teams, while serving as a veteran presence, adds a layer of reliability that coaches value deeply. Kennedy's performance when called upon reinforced why Detroit trusted him late in the season. Those decisions aren't glamorous, but they shape how smoothly an offense operates over a long year. Ultimately, the wide receiver room reflects where the Lions are as a franchise right now. This is not a unit searching for identity. It's a unit refining one. The production is already there. The historical milestones are already being set. What comes next is about turning flashes into consistency and good seasons into great ones. If that happens, this group won't just be discussed as one of the better receiver rooms in the league. It will be viewed as one of the foundations that keeps Detroit competing at the highest level year after year. One thing that still deserves more attention is how this receiver room fits into the broader structure of Detroit's offense and why its success in 2025 wasn't accidental. This wasn't a group surviving on isolated big plays or short-term hot streaks. It was a unit that consistently functioned as a system, where each role amplified the others. That's why the Lions finishing near the top of the league in passing efficiency categories matters more than any single stat line. It shows sustainability. When defenses sold out to limit Amon-Ra St. Brown in the middle of the field, Jameson Williams punished them over the top. When coverage widened to respect Williams' speed, St. Brown went back to work underneath. And when attention tilted heavily toward those two, Isaac Tesla found space in critical moments, particularly in the red zone. That balance is difficult to defend, and it's even harder to maintain over a full season. Detroit didn't just maintain it, they leaned into it. This is also where the growth of the quarterback-receiver connection becomes relevant without needing to be overstated. Timing routes, yards after catch, and explosive completions don't happen unless receivers and the quarterback see the game the same way. The fact that Detroit led the league in yards after the catch is a reflection of anticipation and trust. Receivers were catching the ball already in stride, already transitioning into runners. That's not luck, that's cohesion. Looking ahead, the drops issue almost feels like the defining hinge point for this unit. It's the one area that clearly regressed from the previous season, and it stands out precisely because so much else went right. Drops are correctable. They're about concentration, repetition, and detail. If that area normalizes, even slightly, the numbers across the board improve without changing the structure of the offense at all. The depth conversation also ties directly into durability. Over the course of a long season, injuries are inevitable. What Detroit showed in 2025 is that they can absorb those moments without the offense collapsing. Tom Kennedy stepping in when St. Brown went down, or handling return duties when Khalif Raymond was injured, is evidence of preparation. It's not exciting, but it's how winning teams survive December football. From a roster-building standpoint, the Lions are in a position of strength at receiver, not uncertainty. Brad Holmes doesn't have to chase desperation upgrades. Any additions, whether through the draft or otherwise, are about value and fit, not panic. That's a very different place than where this franchise lived for many years. It allows Detroit to focus resources elsewhere while still believing this receiver room can win matchups on its own. When you strip everything down, this group represents what this era of Lions football is trying to be. Tough, explosive, accountable, and still hungry. The foundation is there. The ceiling hasn't been hit yet, and that's what should excite fans the most. This isn't a peak. It feels like a midpoint. There's still another layer to unpack here, and it revolves around expectations. Expectations change everything. In previous years, any productive stretch from Detroit's receivers felt like a bonus. In 2025, it became the standard. That shift matters because it changes how success and failure are judged. When this group dropped passes, it wasn't brushed off as growing pains. It stood out because the bar had already been raised by what they had proven they could do. That's the reality of having a player like Amon-Ra St. Brown at the center of your offense. His consistency forces everyone else to elevate. He doesn't disappear for weeks at a time. He doesn't rely on favorable matchups. He shows up, produces, and sets the emotional temperature of the huddle. That's why his career-high drops number drew attention. Not because he was bad, but because the standard he set made it noticeable. And that kind of internal pressure is usually a catalyst for correction, not decline.